Welcome. Thanks for joining me today. As we've gone through our mindfulness practice together, I think one thing that a lot of people come up against and struggle with, especially when they're starting mindfulness practice, is what to do with thoughts and how to deal with thoughts. I know a lot of people, when they hear about mindfulness, I think they have a misconception about it, thinking that, oh, well, mindfulness isn't for me, I think too much. I like to let my mind wander, I like to think. Well, that's fine. You can still think when you do mindfulness. I think what happens when we start mindfulness practice is that we're building a concentration practice, we're building our focus. And so we come back to the breath. We focus a lot on our breathing, we find an anchor inside of us, and we use that to tether our awareness into the present moment. And when we're faced with all the thoughts and the thinking mind that comes up, it's easy to get frustrated and to get down on ourselves for not being able to stop our thinking. Because, again, there's this misconception that we have to stop thinking if we're doing mindfulness, or that we have to eliminate all thoughts so we can be perfectly calm and serene. Well, that's kind of unrealistic, especially when you consider that different scientific studies have shown that the typical human thinks about, at the most, 60,000 thoughts in a day. That's a lot of thinking. So to think that you're not going to think at all during your meditation is really setting yourself up for frustration and a lot of, it's like you're setting yourself up to fail, because that's kind of an inhuman thing to do, especially when we're starting our meditation practice. I know when I started my meditation practice, it was on a retreat, and the very first few days of the retreat I was just so angry and frustrated with myself, because instead of being able to feel calm and at ease for extended periods of time, I would have like, oh, calmness, 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 and then, what am I having for lunch? Where are we going after this? All these thoughts would just start coming into my mind, and I didn't know what to do with them because I wanted to come back to the breath, but they wouldn't go away. And so I just was judging myself, and then in addition to having thoughts of what's happening next or where am I going or just kind of mundane thinking, I would get this critical mind going on too. So I had thoughts of judgment as well, kind of layering on to whatever thinking I already had. And so the attitude that I had towards my thinking mind when I first started my practice was very much one of aversion and frustration and confusion, not knowing what to do with it, and thinking that if I'm thinking, I must be meditating wrong. So Joseph Goldstein has a quote about the thinking mind that I think is appropriate. He says, "Normally our thoughts have tremendous power in our lives. They are the dictators of our mind. Go here, go there, do this, do that. We're the slaves of them. And yet, when we are aware of them, when we're mindful that we're thinking, we see that a thought as a phenomenon is completely empty and fleeting. It's little more than nothing. It's very freeing." So I think we want to get to that place where we can see the thought as this empty phenomenon. But first, what's happening in our practice is that it's appearing as this dictator. It's appearing as something that we're buying into and that we're giving a lot of power to, because we're not even aware that it's a thought. We're just aware that it's something distracting us from our breath. So it's easy when we're first starting our practice to see this tiny dictator, our thoughts, as a hindrance or something that's stopping us from being able to reach this relaxation or this liberation, this state of mind where we're free from thinking, we're free from worries, we're free from stress. And as we have thoughts, especially as we're first starting, I think my first thought was that they were a hindrance and that they were an obstacle and that I wasn't ever going to be enlightened or even get any sort of stress reduction from this mindfulness stuff, because all I could do was think. But so what we're working for in our practice is actually to change our relationship to thinking, so that instead of it being one of aversion and frustration, instead of seeing it as an obstacle, we can see our thinking as a doorway or a vehicle to our liberation and to our awareness, to this stress-free, happy place, which we might even see that that's not what we're hoping for. Maybe our goal is a little bit different. So as mindfulness practice, especially initially, is about developing concentration on the breath, I think what's as important is that we're developing compassion too. Because if our practice is all about coming back to the breath, but at the cost of our ego and our own, we're just beating ourselves up all the time because we can't come back to the breath because all we're doing is thinking, and how dumb we are because we're thinking, we're not very good at meditating, and I paid how much for this retreat, what are we doing? If that's where the mind is going, and that's what we're doing is just making ourselves unhappy and causing ourselves extra suffering, then I don't think that's the goal of practice. Our goal in practice is about building this concentration, but also building a compassionate heart that can hold ourselves when we can't concentrate for the whole 45 minutes or 15 minutes. So when our thoughts come in and we're afraid of them or averse to them, often what will happen is that they'll get louder and more, they'll get stronger and kind of try to control us even more. And when we try to push them away right off the bat or try to zap them out of our consciousness, we lose out on the chance to really get to know ourselves better, and we lose out on the opportunity to see what makes us tick and also what ticks us off. So instead of fearing our thoughts or instead of being afraid of them, it's important in our practice that we are comfortable and familiar with our thinking so that we can begin to see different patterns in our thinking. We can see when our mind starts to do this, oh, what happens to our body? It's really like actually an opportunity to get to know ourselves much better, and you'll start to see what's going on. And instead of just constantly reacting to our thinking mind, there's actually a space then that develops where we can decide what we want to do. And we're not living in constant fear and stress of our own thinking mind. If we go back to the idea of the dictator, by allowing our thoughts to be there, by allowing the dictator to be there, inviting him to tea, we kind of regain our autonomy in our lives. We're no longer set listening to him and doing exactly what the dictator says to do. We can actually decide, oh, I don't want to pay attention to that thought right now. I don't think I'm going to buy into that one right now. So for example, before I was giving this talk, as I was getting ready to give the talk, I had a lot of thoughts of doubt and anxiety and thinking that I wasn't good enough or that I couldn't do this right. But with the help of my husband and also my mindfulness practice, I was able to remember that those are just thoughts. Like, that's not the truth of the matter, and I'm not going to know unless I try. And so when I was able to see my thoughts as thoughts, I didn't have to believe them. I didn't have to buy into them. And I also didn't have to be afraid of feeling anxious or of feeling nervous about it. I was able to take care of myself compassionately and do some breathing ahead of time. I think I'll end with a quote from Sharon Salzberg, another mindfulness teacher who I've learned quite a bit from. She says, "Meditation isn't about what's happening, it's about how you relate to what's happening. You have a torrent of thoughts and difficult emotions, but that's okay. You can be with them not only with mindfulness, but with compassion." And so I hope that this talk has kind of cleared up any misconception or misunderstanding about what to do with thoughts and that you're not supposed to think, and actually has helped you to develop a better relationship with your thinking mind. Thanks so much.